Here's the rephrased version. Slammed doors and fire alarms. I can't stand people, especially kids my age. Humans are so unpredictable, and it's even worse when they're teenagers. All the backstabbing, lies, and gossip. It makes me furious just thinking about it. It broke my heart that we took pleasure in tearing each other down. Sometimes I felt a deep sadness when I thought about my life. Why do I have to live a life that ends just like everyone else's? This feeling hit hardest before and after school. I only had one more week left, starting Monday. I almost felt excited to be done, but then I remembered I still had high school and maybe college. I lived in a tight-knit community, though not exactly small. Almost all the kids my age went to the same school, so seeing a new face was rare. So when I saw a new kid sitting alone at his table, my curiosity sparked, and for the first time in a while, I felt a bit of excitement. Why was there a new kid at the end of the school year? I walked across the lunchroom and sat down across from him. I've never seen you here before. Did you just move? I asked, my voice filled with wonder. I've lived here all my life. I know everyone here, including you, Derek. I didn't quite catch his words, though. I was too focused on his face. Hey, why do you look like me? I said a bit harshly. The kid just smiled at me. That's for you to figure out. Okay, dude, I said, grabbing my lunch and heading to my own isolated table. I barely ate. All I could think about was how that boy looked exactly like me. Did I have a twin no one told me about? My mom was definitely going to be answering some questions when I got home. She was a hardworking woman who never hesitated to give her honest opinion. Sugarcoating was not her thing. She was tall, with beautiful black hair that reached her shoulder blades, and jade eyes that sparkled when the sun hit them just right. Mom, do I have a twin brother? I asked from the kitchen table. She stopped putting dishes away and turned to face me. There was a clear look of confusion on her face before it shifted to what I'd call judgment. Aren't you too old for imaginary friends? She teased, poking fun at me. I wasn't amused. I forced a laugh and retreated to my room. The more I thought about the boy, the more I began to worry that I was losing my mind. But the more I thought about him, the more calm I became. I checked the clock on my bedside table before crawling into bed for an afternoon nap. When I checked the time again, it was 5:45 a.m. the next morning. I had slept nearly 15 hours, and I felt great. The next day at school was awful. Even though it had gotten a little better this last week, I still had a bullying problem. These weren't your typical movie bullies, though. They were vicious, even for 8th graders, like little piranhas feeding off of shame and insecurity instead of flesh. By the end of the day, I was missing a shoe and had a swollen, shiny eye. As I was walking out the door, I saw that boy again, or better yet, the other me. He was standing around the corner of the building, waving me over. I looked around, pointing to myself to make sure he was talking to me. He nodded and gestured again. "What do you want, dude?" I said, already annoyed and fed up with this hellhole of a school. "Soon, my friend, you will be lifted up and your sorrows will be crushed beneath your feet," he said, pulling me into a firm embrace. Normally, I'd freak out and pull away, but this time was different. I stayed in his arms, feeling like I'd never felt safer. It felt like hours, but we didn't say a word. He walked me home that day, not speaking the whole way. When we reached my house, he simply patted my back, gave a short nod, and walked away. "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" My mom asked, oddly cheerful. She's a defense attorney, so her leaving work in a good mood was always a shock. Before I could answer, she stormed over to me and crouched down until she was eye level. "What happened to my baby's face?" she said, almost shaking with a mix of sadness and rage. "Don't worry, Mom. It's nothing, I promise," I said, smiling. After about 30 minutes of relentless questioning, she finally dropped it. As I walked to my room, I felt nothing but security. For some reason, my usual feelings of disdain and annoyance weren't there. I felt happy, excited even. So excited, in fact, that I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day was awful. I didn't see the strange boy at school, and a wave of sadness washed over me as I left the building. My tormentors were relentless today. When I got home, I realized my mom wasn't there. I ran to my room, seizing the opportunity to cry undisturbed. I cried for hours, clutching my privates. They made me expose myself while they recorded it. At the time, my brain thought it was a better choice than getting my face beaten in. But now I wish I had just taken the beating. The tears kept flowing until there were no more left, and I fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of a knock on my bedroom door. I sat there frozen in fear until I heard a voice, my voice, coming from the other side. It said, "Don't be scared, Derek. You've been waiting for tomorrow your whole life. It's time to get ready." I didn't understand exactly what he meant, but somehow I knew what he was talking about. Tomorrow is the day. It's finally time. I'm writing this last part before I carry out my plan. I'm so excited I can barely contain myself. I felt the need to document this week, not out of confusion, but out of pride. After today, all I'll know is peace. Thank you all for reading, and I'll talk to you soon. I'm sorry it took me so long to address the post, but the grieving process has been incredibly difficult for me. After reading my son's blog, I feel so stupid for not noticing it sooner. I can't sleep or even close my eyes without hearing that phone call. I've never felt so much pain and fear until I pressed that phone to my ear. It was my son, and he said, "Hey, Mom, it's Derek. I'm not going to be home in time for dinner. I've got some stuff to take care of at school. I love you, and I'll see you later." The phone fell from my hand in shock. My son is 27. He's been out of school for at least 9 years. But it's almost as if what I heard made it real. In the background of the call, I heard something that will haunt me for the rest of my life as a mother. I heard the blaring of fire alarms, blended with screams, and doors slamming in the background. I ran to my son's room, frantically searching, until I found something that confirmed my worst fear: his medication. He hadn't taken it in 7 months. 23 lives were lost today, including my son's. I wish I could have seen the signs. I could have saved them. I could have saved my son. Please pay close attention to your loved ones. You never know what they're going through. To all the families of the victims, I know my words may mean nothing, but I am truly sorry and utterly destroyed by your loss. And to my son, wherever he was sent after this life. Why? I'm a billionaire, and I'm genuinely scared someone might try to kill me. I should have realized right away that the interviewee seemed off. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and had an expensive-looking haircut, but his shoes were obvious knockoffs. During his second-round interview, I was called down to meet him. His credentials were spot on, and his voice didn't grate on my nerves, so I was already thinking, yeah, he'll work. But as we shook hands at the end, a sharp, burning pain shot through my palm, like a bee sting. When he pulled away, I saw a sharp tack hidden inside his hand. I was stunned. He chuckled lightly. "Gotcha!" I stared at him. "Gotcha!" With a casual shrug, he walked himself out. I immediately told front door security he was never allowed back inside. The next morning, I stepped into the shower. While waiting for the water to heat up, I held my hand under the faucet, letting the stream run over my skin. About 30 seconds in, something felt wrong. My skin was melting. I screamed and stumbled out of the shower, frantically grabbing a towel to dry off. Half of my left hand was stripped down to the bone. The flesh between my fingers had dripped away like melted wax. Parts of my arm looked distorted, smudged, like I'd been sculpted from soft clay. A visit to a private hospital turned up nothing. The doctors were stumped. Despite missing chunks of skin, muscle, and fat from my arms, I felt no pain at all. My entire body had gone numb. Worse, any contact with water made my flesh dissolve like wet clay. Even a single drop turned my skin to mud. 2 weeks of endless tests led nowhere. Sure, I was terrified for my life, but I was equally worried about the clueless execs at my company botching preparations for our biggest tech conference of the year. Determined not to abandon the empire I'd spent my entire adult life building, I hired the doctors to treat me at home. Work couldn't wait. I returned to work covered head to toe, gloves, long pants, and a turtleneck. The only thing I could safely drink was medical-grade saline. No matter how much deodorant I used, I still reeked. Wearing 3 layers of clothes and never being able to shower will do that. Thankfully, my employees knew I had some kind of skin condition and politely pretended not to notice, just as loyal staff should. My life narrowed down to a strict loop: house to limo to office, back to the limo, and home again, where doctors waited with more tests. I hadn't been to my favorite restaurant in weeks. I missed my oldest son's birthday. Worst of all, I even skipped my box seats at the last hockey game. Unthinkable. Yeah, laugh it up. But death is death. Billionaire or not, you'd be scared too if some psycho in a red hoodie was stalking you. And it's clearly him, that creep from the interview. Looks like he never landed another job because he's been camped out across the street from my house, spying on me. I've sent my security team after him more times than I can count, but he's slippery, like a rat. Every time someone gets close, he vanishes without a trace. It's been a living nightmare. I even hired 4 extra guards, but all they seem good for is chirping all clear into their radios. The one time they almost caught him, they found something he left behind. A big red water gun. A super soaker. That's when it clicked. The tack, my weird disease, he's planning to kill me. He's trying to melt me. Yesterday, they finally caught him. I wanted him hauled off to jail immediately, but apparently carrying a couple of water balloons in your jacket isn't exactly grounds for arrest. So instead, I had my security team lock him up in the deepest basement office at my company. His hands were tied, and they stripped him of all his belongings, including a diary filled with slogans like "Wealth must end" and "Deny, defend, depose." With his full name and application details from when he'd applied to my company, I tossed his resume onto his lap. "So, Mr. Derek Elton Jones," I sneered, "am I part of your little kill the rich crusade?" He stared at the resume, refusing to meet my eyes. "Billionaires shouldn't exist," he muttered. I scoffed, incredulous. "I'm not a billionaire. That's an inflated net worth that changes all the time. I run a tax software company. What exactly have I done wrong?" His cold gaze finally met mine. "You help the rich evade tax. Is that what he thinks? That's the exact opposite of what my software does," I snapped. "My customers are people who want to pay their taxes properly." He stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to smack the back of his head. "Tell me exactly what kind of biological weapon you pricked me with 2 months ago," I demanded. "And then maybe we can talk about letting you go." He mumbled something under his breath. "Speak up, Derek." His nose twitched. "Haven't bathed in weeks, have you?" I leaned in close, just inches from his face, my patience snapping. "That's why they call you stinking rich," he smirked. Before I could slap him, he spit right in my face. My vision blurred instantly as I stumbled back, shouting in shock. When I finally wiped his spit off my brow, I saw parts of my nose, lips, and left eye lying on the floor. He just watched, laughing. "Don't you get it?" he sneered. "I didn't infect you with anything. You did this to yourself. Your greed, your untouchable ego, it's rotting you from the inside out." I had to leave work after that. My face was too far gone, and I couldn't risk further infection. The guards let Derek go too. My lawyer insisted holding him any longer could land me in serious legal trouble. Reluctantly, I relented. Now, I'm alone, trapped in a decaying body, surrounded by doctors who either draw my blood or inject me with experimental treatments that never work. I haven't told my ex, my kids, or anyone in my family. What would be the point? They haven't spoken to me since last Christmas. I've already paid off the local news to spotlight one of my last major donations to a charity in Ghana, because people need to remember the good I've done. And I have done good. I came from a middle-class family, worked my ass off, and earned an upper-class lifestyle. I'm a living example of the American dream, the power of an individual's will to succeed. But I keep thinking about the last thing Derek said, about my selfishness, my greed. I keep telling myself he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, that he's just following some dumb trends on social media. He should learn to respect other people, our society, our entire system of capitalism. I've already paid off the local news to spotlight one of my last major donations to a charity in Ghana, because people need to remember the good I've done. And I have done good. I came from a middle-class family, worked my ass off, and earned an upper-class lifestyle. I'm a living example of the American dream, the power of an individual's will to succeed. But I keep thinking about the last thing Derek said, about my selfishness, my greed. I keep telling myself he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, that he's just following some dumb trends on social media. He should learn to respect other people, our society, our entire system of capitalism. But despite all of this, when I look at the distorted reflection of myself in the bedside mirror, at the exposed skull creeping across the left side of my face, there's this strange feeling of acceptance that I can't quite shake. It's like, even though I look like a melting wax figure, like some nightmarish zombie crawling out of the grave. And even though I know I should probably book reconstructive surgery, or at least some skin grafts to fix my appearance, there's this quiet voice inside me that says, no, you deserve to look like this. And I can't help but wonder, maybe I do. On June 10, 1995, Detroit police responded to an emergency call from a security guard at an abandoned warehouse. The guard reported finding several dead bodies and one survivor who remained silent. When officers arrived, they were struck by the deafening music blasting from inside. The sound was so loud, it reached their patrol car from the street. As they entered the building, they recognized the song, The Safety Dance, by Men Without Hats, playing on an endless loop throughout their time on the scene. Inside the warehouse, officers quickly realized the security guard had downplayed the horror of the scene. The space was littered with mutilated bodies, with at least 3 noted in the report as disarticulated. Disturbing details, including what appeared to be satanic imagery in the victims' clothing, tattoos, and overall style, led officers to believe the killings were ritualistic and tied to the occult. Amid the carnage, they found the sole survivor, a frail, sickly-looking young man around 18 to 22 years old. He kept his face buried in his hands, refusing to uncover it despite the officers' efforts. The man was otherwise cooperative, standing, submitting to a search, and following instructions. But when asked his name, he responded only with laughter. When asked any question, the young man responded only with laughter, refusing to speak a single word. What happened next is unclear, with details of the sequence remaining murky. At some point, the youth bent into a deep bow, pausing as though expecting a reply. None of the officers reacted. He bowed again, prompting one of them to crouch down and ask if he was feeling okay. The young man responded with more laughter, then stood upright and slid his right foot forward in a peculiar motion. He repeated the movement once more, leaving the officers baffled. Around 10 seconds later, the young man launched a sudden and fatal attack on the officer. The sheer brutality of the assault caused chaos, allowing him to flee the scene. He was apprehended by AHH personnel roughly 2 hours later. The team had already been operating in the area due to their pursuit of inmate number 10, which uniquely equipped them to identify, track, and capture a second anomaly. When taken into custody, the young man immediately bowed to the staff, repeating the same gesture he had made earlier. The agency has since determined that this bow is the initial move in a deadly pattern they now refer to as the copycat game. At the time, staff had no understanding of the situation. Shortly after the inmate initiated his game, multiple personnel narrowly escaped death. T-Class Agent Christoph W. managed to divert the entity's attention long enough for field restraints to be improvised and applied on site. Once secured, both the inmate and inmate number 10 were transported into agency custody. Important notice: this inmate must remain fully restrained at all times. Even when restrained, the inmate persistently attempts to initiate his game. If the initiation is successful, any personnel involved are at extreme risk and in critical danger. The extreme danger posed by the inmate lies in the complexity of his game. Instead of simple gestures, he performs intricate dance-like routines that are nearly impossible for participants to replicate. Failure to mimic these movements precisely results in a gruesome and violent death. As such, preventing initiation of the copycat game is an absolute priority. The inmate exhibits an obsessive compulsion to begin the game, which cannot be suppressed. Even in complete restraint, deprived of movement, light, sound, or any external stimuli, he persistently attempts to perform the opening move. This relentless behavior creates a significant and constant threat to any personnel interacting with him, regardless of the conditions. The extreme danger posed by the inmate lies in the complexity of his game. Instead of simple gestures, he performs intricate dance-like routines that are nearly impossible for participants to replicate. Failure to mimic these movements precisely results in a gruesome and violent death. As such, preventing initiation of the copycat game is an absolute priority. The inmate exhibits an obsessive compulsion to begin the game, which cannot be suppressed, even in complete restraint. Deprived of movement, light, sound, or any external stimuli, he persistently attempts to perform the opening move. This relentless behavior creates a significant and constant threat to any personnel interacting with him, regardless of the conditions. The entity appears as a young male, estimated to be between 17 and 23 years old. He stands 5.5s with a muscular build, but his physical appearance is highly abnormal. His skin is decayed and patchy, with areas of discoloration. Instead of eyes, he has empty sockets, and where a nose should be, there is a snout-like structure ending in a large, open wound. Given his uncontrollable obsessive behavior and the severe threat he poses to staff, the agency has consistently advocated for his termination at the earliest feasible opportunity. On December 8, 2024, AHH NASCU research staff developed a potential method for destruction. This approach temporarily renders the entity mortal while significantly reducing his inhuman strength to manageable levels. Due to a lack of proper training opportunities for field agents, Commander Raphael W. requested approval to use the inmate's termination as a training exercise for newly commissioned staff. The interview below was conducted as part of the agency's effort to determine if any form of behavioral modification could be applied, essentially to see if the inmate could be, for lack of a better term, salvaged. After reviewing the interview and all available information, administration concluded that rehabilitation was not feasible and approved the inmate's destruction. Permission was granted to proceed with the termination as a training exercise scheduled for December 10, 2024. Commander Raphael W. and T-Class Agent Christophe W. were assigned as trainers. The interviewer, however, strongly disagreed with the decision, believing that rehabilitation was not only possible but likely. Following Commander Raphael W.'s advice, the interviewer played the safety dance right before the session to provoke a response. Since the song had been playing during the inmate's initial discovery, the commander hypothesized it might hold some significance to the inmate and potentially open a channel for communication. The inmate's reaction was entirely unexpected. Interview subject: the dancer classification string: uncooperative, destructible, Gaian, constant, critical, Damon. Rachel B. and Christophe W. Interview date 12/10/24. I hate that motherfucking song. I hate it. Turn it off. Turn it off. Thank God. Thank you. Okay, so long story short, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know what got me there? Dance. I just wanted to dance. My whole life. That's all I ever wanted to do. Laugh if you want. Tons of people did. Little twink wants to be a ballerina. Whatever. I've heard it all. And they were all wrong. Dancing takes strength like you wouldn't believe. Go ahead. Check out a real dancer. Really look at them and thank me later. But before you do, ask yourself if you really think you have what it takes to beat their ass. You know what? I'll just tell you the answer. You don't. That was my childhood, dealing with a bunch of losers who couldn't last a minute in Dance Dance Revolution, even if they tried, bullying the hell out of me. I had to bully them back. I always won, even after I kicked the asses of the 10 friends who tried before them. I never got it. I still don't. The only thing I can figure is they only saw what they expected to see. When they looked at me, they saw a dance fanatic, 5'5" if I stood on my tiptoes, so they figured I was an easy target. The problem is, I'm anything but easy, and I'm anything but a target. Anyway, I grew up, got the hell out of that small town, and headed for the big city. If I were more eloquent, I'd try to describe the sights, the sounds, and that rush you feel when you finally get a life of your own. I'd try to talk about the friends, too. What it means to have friends, more than that, a community, after growing up as a target. All I can really say is I finally found people who saw me, who wanted me around. People who didn't look at me as an easy target. So, I found a group. I dove in headfirst and had the time of my life. Drinks, drugs, girls, nightlife, day life, even work. I loved it all because it was my life. I finally had a life and I loved it. But I loved dancing the most. I'm a dancer even now. That's the only part of me that's still here, the dancing. My first memory is waltzing across my mom's bedroom. I was so small that my crib was still in the corner. What I'd give to wake up right there in the middle of that memory and have a second chance to do it all over again. Anyway, like I said, I found a good group. The best kind at the perfect time. Half of them were already there when I arrived, and the other half came in after me. And we just went for it every free minute. Parties, raves, practices, rehearsals, choreography, bouncing ideas off each other, collaborating. We were building our community by making art. Like I said, I was having the time of my life. That's what I was doing the night everything went to hell, having the time of my life. My friends were all incredible people. Jody was the most incredible. Talk about a soul connection. That girl was my one and only cosmic bond. More than a friend, more than a sister, a platonic soulmate, I miss her. The only thing I don't regret about that night is being able to help her. So yeah, Jody was incredible, but not all of Jody's friends were. You know what I mean? And because she was so incredible, those people just orbited her. The closest to greatness they'd ever come, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, all those not so incredible people showed up all the time. It was fine when they were just participating, hanging out or whatever. But the problems came when they started hijacking our stuff. And they did that a lot. That's why that night turned into a wrong place, wrong time situation, because the not so incredible people crashed our party. It was just a regular party, basically a dance night, not quite a rave. Someone had rigged a speaker system inside an old warehouse and messed with the speakers by playing all kinds of 80s music. It was fun though, just a regular dance night, all music, movement, and expression. How it's supposed to be. The kind of atmosphere that artists of any kind really get into. The problem with most of the Not Incredibles is none of them were actually artistic. Whenever they came to these events, they always got bored. That's what happened. 2 of Jody's Not Incredibles got bored. Honestly, I get it. If you don't like to move, if you can't let go and express yourself, if you can't get past the weight of your own self-consciousness, if you can't lose yourself without worrying about the people around you, then dancing isn't all that fun. And I'm not trying to be a dick, but trust me, those guys couldn't do any of that. After a while, they kind of split off from the group and disappeared into the back. I noticed. I didn't want to notice. I didn't bring them. I didn't like them. They weren't my responsibility. But when you grow up being a target, your situational awareness goes through the roof. And there was something about the way they were moving that made me uneasy. So I watched them. They kept coming back to the floor, only to vanish into the back again. Back and forth, back and forth. Then they started getting this ugly, shiny kind of smile that I've learned to distrust with every fiber of my being. So, the next time they crept away, I followed. I found them in the very back, behind a wall of old machinery. They were laughing over this homeless dude passed out on the floor. He'd been there so long, there was dust in his hair. His hands were covering his face, which was weird. But not the weirdest thing. He was skinny but huge, 6 feet, maybe even a little more. And he was dressed ridiculously. I mean, ridiculous. He was wearing this tattered old suit with a cummerbund and tailcoat and a top hat. Stains everywhere, frayed hems, even moth-eaten spots. He didn't just look homeless. He looked stupid. I kind of understood why the Not Incredibles were laughing so hard. I went up to see what they were doing, as casually as I could, but they barely even noticed me. They were too busy fucking with the guy, towing him, stepping on his feet, his fingers, poking his hat. Finally, the guy sat up, still covering his face with his hands, and started to whine. He sounded like a sick dog. Not Incredible number 1 squatted down, covered his face with his own hands, and pretended to cry. "What the hell are you guys doing?" I asked. They started laughing. The guy on the floor whimpered and rolled onto his back. He kept his face covered, but kicked his feet in the air like an overturned turtle. Not Incredible number 2 copied him, laughing so hard he was gagging. Then the guy sat up. The Not Incredibles dragged him to his feet. He flopped around like a puppet, still covering his face. By that point, I already had a terminal case of the creeps. Before I could say anything, they hauled him off, heading straight for the dance floor. No one was particularly pleased when they interrupted, but they were too excited to notice. "Look at this," they kept saying. Watch! This is awesome! Because there's nothing else you can do when a bunch of losers hijack your party, everyone stopped and watched as the homeless guy kicked his feet into the air. Not Incredible 2 did the same, laughing his ass off. Then, the homeless guy leaned forward in this big exaggerated stretch. He still kept those hands plastered to his face. Not Incredible 2 copied him. After that, Mr. Homeless turned around to face the rest of us right as the motherfucking safety dance started to play. God, I hate that song. I hate it. As I watched, he swept into this low, deep bow without uncovering his face. Come on, said Not Incredible 2. He wants to play with all of us. Group game. As if on cue, Mr. Homeless extended one leg. And unfortunately, everyone was just drunk enough and just mean enough to be and just curious enough to play along, including me. So we all copied him. Then he extended the second leg. We all followed suit. People around me started laughing. I didn't. Not because I was a prude or anything, but because this whole thing was grossing me out. I grew up in an area with a lot of homeless people. I knew some of them by name. This was just gross. It was fucking gross. Mr. Homeless pulled another move, a ridiculous sort of slide, the kind that would normally require jazz hands, except of course he couldn't use his hands because they were still clamped to his face. Not Incredible 2 copied the move along with all the rest of us, but Not Incredible 1 lost it and fell down laughing. Instantly, Mr. Homeless's hands dropped from his face, revealing something awful, like a decaying snout, empty eyes, like something dying. And he jumped at Not Incredible 1 like a bear and tore his face off. I'm used to being a target. The corollary to being a target is instantly intuiting how to become less of one. Sometimes you accomplish that by fighting. Occasionally, you do it by running. Sometimes, you do it by playing along. So, while other people were screaming and running for the doors, I stood my ground and watched. I wasn't the only one. About 12 of us stayed put, including Jody. I don't like making assumptions, but after checking everyone who stood their ground, I'd bet a lot of money that they were all used to being targets too. The homeless guy covered his face again and shuffled back to the front of the room. When he bent forward, I copied him. So did Jody. So did the others who stayed put. Nobody who broke and ran even saw the move, let alone copied it. Mr. Homeless went after each and every one of them. And goddamn if it didn't look like he was having fun. He lumbered towards some of them like Frankenstein, arms out, shuffling forward. He pounced on others like a jaguar and launched himself through the air like he was Batman. It was terrifying, but it was so terrifying and so violent it almost didn't feel real. It was insane. He tore off a bunch of heads. He popped some arms off like a mean kid pulling wings off a fly. One girl, he bent her backward till she snapped in half like a graham cracker. Your brain comes up with weird shit when you're in crisis. And that's what mine came up with when I watched him snap her. A human graham cracker. A full-on s'more, if you want to count the stuff that came out of her when she broke. Once he finished off all the runners, Mr. Homeless shuffled back to the DJ table and pulled another move. The 13 of us who'd kept our heads, figuratively at first, now literally, copied the move. And the next one. And the next one. And the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Even after the stench of blood and open guts started rising around us like a cloud. Even after the blood puddles leaked across the floor and soaked our shoes. The blood puddles actually took out the next one. He was copying just fine. Better than me, if we're being honest. But he slipped on the blood. Slipped and fell into a kind of half split. Mr. Homeless froze, hands still plastered to his face. And then he jumped and crunched that poor kid's chest in like a hollow chocolate bunny. Some of him, blood, guts, bone shards for all I know, splattered all over my face. Mr. Homeless stood up, stomped a few more times like a kid crushing a bug, and then marched back to the table, squatting down and raising his elbows. We did the same. As time passed, it got harder. I won't say he was trying to make us do anything too complicated, but when your mind is already fried, your stomach's churning from adrenaline, you're drenched in sweat, and your feet keep almost slipping in your friend's blood or some high school kid's tongue, even simple tasks start to feel overwhelming. To this day, I'm not sure what was worse, the way he hid his face when we got it right, or the terror that showed when he went after someone who stepped out of line. We all managed to get through the tough, one-off moves. I guess he thought those were too easy, so he started throwing in routines, short, multi-step dance sequences. He was making us perform choreography. That's when I began to think I might actually get out of there alive. Routines are just dances, and I can dance. I don't even have to think about it. I just can. The next person eliminated didn't even make a mistake. She just had a meltdown, a full-on panic attack. The choreographer took her out so fast that I think she kept screaming for a moment even after she was dead. Then the routines got stranger and harder. At one point, we lost 4 people in just as many turns. The brutal way their bodies were destroyed made me puke. But at least I threw up between turns. My vomit hit the guy next to me. He slipped and fell in it. He didn't even get a chance to look at me before that thing jumped on him and crushed his head like a pumpkin. My God, then there were 6 of us left. Then 5. The next person died because she tried to attack him. I don't know what she was thinking. Maybe, only because it crossed my mind. She thought we were stuck in some sort of magical bubble, and if she jumped and hit him just right, it might have the same effect as when he hit us. Like his feet smashing rib cages, or his hands turning heads and guts to pulp. I was starting to think maybe fighting was the answer all along, not playing along. She threw herself at him, even managed to grab him around the waist, but she was dead before he even flinched. What he did to her was horrific. Pieces of her rained down for at least 10 seconds. One of her teeth got stuck in my hair. Her attempt must have really pissed him off because the routine after that was brutal. It was almost a full dance on its own. 2 people were lost that round. He killed the first one quickly, but not fast enough to stop the second from crying. Maybe the crying bothered him. Maybe he was just annoyed that the other one died so fast. Either way, he made sure the second one died slowly. And then it was just me and Jody. I was exhausted, and so was she. I saw everything I felt reflected in her. Sweat-drenched clothes, tight muscles, tears, and blood smeared across our clothes, faces, and even drying in our hair. But she was in worse shape than I was. Much worse, because she was shaking. I knew that if that bastard threw another complicated copycat routine, Jody wouldn't make it. So, while he slowly and joyfully dismembered the last person, I grabbed Jody's hand and ran. It was almost dawn. I could see through the windows. The sky had that shimmering pale gold, almost light, but not quite the kind you only see on perfect summer mornings. That gave me hope. Damn me, but that perfect golden light made me think we were almost free. As that damn song looped again, the choreographer jumped into another routine. I was right. It was long. It was complicated. And since I was running, I'd already lost. But the routine was so long that he was still going, while Jody and I had already made it halfway across the warehouse. We reached the door, and I looked back just in time to see the choreographer charging across the floor. I shoved Jody outside. She collapsed onto the sidewalk with a sob, her knee cracking when it hit the concrete. Even after everything, the sound her knee made still makes me shudder. Just thinking about it gives me the chills. Dawn broke, spilling sunlight across the street like shimmering syrup. The choreographer pulled me back into the warehouse. The door slammed shut as Jody screamed. I braced myself, expecting to be crushed like a hollow chocolate rabbit, smashed like a bug, cracked open like a pumpkin, or torn apart in a rain of gore. But none of that happened. The choreographer grabbed my hands and pulled me close, pressing that rotting snout to my nose. Then he shrank. The snout receded. His eyes slowly formed in those empty sockets. His skin grew back. Still not healthy, but at least it looked alive, not like a dried-up mummy. And suddenly, I wasn't staring at a monster anymore. Just a tired guy who could have been anyone or no one. With genuine horror, I realized this guy had, in fact, been nobody. Just some unlucky bastard out for a good time on a Friday night who ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Just like me, he turned and ran. I tried to follow. When I made it outside, Jody screamed and scrambled away. No one's ever looked at me the way she did. With horror. With hate. I caught my reflection in the window, but it wasn't mine. It was the choreographer's. I thought surviving until dawn meant I won. But that's not how it works. Surviving until dawn just means you trade places with the winner. That's why I always make my games unwinnable. It's better to be dead than to become this. My life's been over ever since. It's been over longer than I ever got to live. Talking to you is nice. It's so nice to talk again. Really, it is. Even about this. But as soon as we're done, I'm going to go right back to being that. To pulling moves and planning how to kill you when you can't make a move in return. To feeling the rush that comes from making you play along until I get tired of you and trick you into losing. It's like a drug. An addiction. Only worse, because it's just me. It's me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I just wanted to go to a party. I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted a life. Instead, I ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't even know where to start with this. I found out that the agency had been trying to kill this boy for a long time, but they couldn't figure out how. Each failed attempt led to a lot of maimed and dead personnel, so they backed off for a while. But on December 8th, they finally figured out how to neutralize him and went full force with the death sentence. They had me interview him on December 10th, but didn't explain why until after it was over. I couldn't believe it when they told me. After that interview, how could they possibly think about killing him? I said as much. They said they'd take it under advisement. I honestly thought the evaluation would take more than just a few hours. So when Christoph came to escort me downstairs about 4 hours after that interview, I didn't think much of it. He wasn't exactly in a good mood, but it was something close to it. Had a good day? I asked. He shrugged. I got to help number 19 today. I told you, helping is my favorite part of my work. It's really important to you to have all the pretty girls think you're awesome, huh? Yes, but not as important as having the unpretty one think so. It took a moment for that to sink in. Really? Why are you offended? The way he imitated my voice was so spot on, I couldn't even get mad. You should be flattered. You know what? I think I am. As we descended, the music started thumping through the floors. By the time we reached the second flight of stairs, the walls were shaking from the bass. Christoph held open the door and ushered me into the room beyond. Though it wasn't really a room, it was more like an arena. The music was so loud it nearly knocked me off my feet. It was so deafening I couldn't even recognize what it was. Field staff were swarming around. I spotted the commander, Gabriella, and a few other staff members I recognized by face but not by name. What is this? I asked. Training arena. Go up, Christoph said quietly. Before they see you looking. I followed him to a row of seats. Love was in one, Mikey in another. He was pale, shaking, and covered in sweat. Love smiled when they saw me, but tears had soaked through the blindfold they always wore. They told me I had to participate, they shouted over the music. But Gabriella stopped them. Isn't that good of her? I looked down into the arena and saw the dancer huddled in the middle, trembling, their face hidden. And then it hit me. The music. The Mortal Kombat theme song. That's when I realized what was happening. Just as panic started to set in, Charlie marched in and shut off the music. What the hell is going on in here? A wave of relief washed over me. Charlie was good. He would stop this. Charlie was like me. Charlie liked me. He cared about the inmates. He was the reason there was a psych program at all. He was the only reason things had gotten better. One of the agents I didn't know grinned widely. What does it look like? Come play with us, Charlie. I was so sure Charlie would yell at him. Instead, he smiled, shrugged off his jacket, and bounded into the fray. What the hell? I whispered. What is he doing? He was a commander too. The youngest one ever, Mikey said. Until he messed up. But he isn't like them. He's why he helps. He's one of them. Have you forgotten who they are? Mikey asked. Or who you are? Because trust me, they haven't. I turned to Christophe. Why did you bring me here? Because they told me to. I'm supposed to explain to you what they're doing to him, why they're doing it, what they did right and what they did wrong. Then I'm supposed to go down and correct their mistakes. But I'm not doing any of that today. No sooner had the words left Christoph's mouth than the agents down below started. It was horrific, like playing soccer with a human instead of a ball. It was violent, extremely so. But extreme violence is strangely mundane in real life. It happens fast, looks oddly nondescript, almost fake. If you're not paying close attention, you can easily miss it, until the blood starts spilling, that is. It only took 10 seconds for blood to spill, and another 30 before the inmate screamed. That's when Christoph jumped up and rushed down into the arena. The other staff stepped back, erupting in a chorus of approving howls and cheers, as if he were the star player in a game. The staff stepped back as Christoph approached the dancer. I was confused. Although I couldn't see his face, nothing in his body language suggested he was about to kill anyone. The dancer looked up at him and nodded. Christoph nodded back. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Then, without warning, he lunged and snapped the dancer's neck. As the dancer crumpled to the floor, an eerie silence fell over everything and everyone. Then, what the hell? Before I talk about the encounters I've witnessed, I think it's important to explain a bit about myself and what led me to work at the Eternal Jubilee Church. I'm not a religious or spiritual person, not that I have anything against it, but I've never felt drawn to it. I grew up in the South, where going to a Baptist church for every service or event was a given. My family was deeply involved. My grandfather was a deacon. Both of my uncles were pastors of separate churches, and my dad was heavily involved with the youth group. In short, we were deeply embedded in church life. I didn't resent this, but I never felt anything toward it. Even as a child, the songs seemed empty. I envied my family because they found peace and joy in their faith, but I just couldn't connect. I wanted to believe, but I never could. After high school, I grew restless and unhappy in my small town, and that dissatisfaction led to laziness and unhealthy habits. After clashing with my family over my lifestyle choices more than ever, I finally cut ties and decided to leave without looking back. This is something I would later regret. My partner and I, much to my family's disappointment, decided to move to his small hometown in the mountains. With similar backgrounds, his family was also very involved in the local church. Struggling financially, his father reluctantly helped me get a job as a custodian at their church, the Eternal Jubilee. But things took an unexpected turn. My partner was eager to return home, yet seemed consumed by misery when we actually got there. It started out small. He became distant and ate less, but it escalated much faster than I could have imagined. His emotions grew more unpredictable, with bursts of anger or silent sulking. He'd never been an emotional person, so seeing him cry was something I wasn't used to. I didn't know how to handle these intense emotions, but they became more frequent. There were days when he couldn't even look at me without breaking down. I'd try to comfort him, but he'd get angry instead. He apologized often, but for reasons that didn't make much sense. Yet, just hours later, he would blame me for vague things again. He would also disappear late at night, claiming to visit his family. His parents were strict and controlling, calling daily without fail and stopping by frequently. They always preferred to speak to him privately, seeming to be watching us no matter the time. They rarely acknowledged me, let alone spoke to me. They were generally polite to their son, but would become cold and distant when they were frustrated with him. I remember one instance where he started crying in front of his father, and the older man shoved him to the ground with all his strength. I tried to step in, but his father walked away without even acknowledging me. I can't bring myself to repeat the horrible things my partner said to me when I tried to defend him. This wasn't like him at all. He would never have spoken to me like that before. Eventually, after being pressured by his family, he joined a faith booster at their church and began attending regularly. I couldn't join because of the exclusive memberships his family had. As a result, I saw him less and less, maybe once or twice a week, and when I did, he wouldn't even make eye contact. After just a month of living there, he lost the fight with his mental health and took his own life, leaving behind only a note, an excerpt of his poetry. A fly fell in love with a spider, throwing itself into its web. A trap, perhaps, but one could see the spider had fallen in love with the fly. But instinct is stronger than love. Oh no, forgive the spider for its hunger. But who was trapped? For the spider's heart was in the fly's trap all along. Not a day passes that I don't miss him. I can't understand why or how things turned so dark. I feel guilty for not understanding, for not saying the right things, for not being able to stop it. I know his parents blame me for his death. After the service, they made it clear they didn't want to stay in touch. I had to keep going, keep working, keep my head down, hoping the pain would eventually fade. I'm sorry, Wade. I thought my hometown was small, but this place makes it seem like nothing. If it were up to me, we'd have moved to a city, somewhere lively and open-minded. But he wanted to come here, to the town that would ultimately destroy him. Despite being so small, the town had many churches, most of them tiny and tucked away. But none of them compared to the massive presence of the Eternal Jubilee Church. It wasn't even listed on digital maps, and finding the building was surprisingly hard at first. The Eternal Jubilee Church was a massive, odd structure. While it resembled other Baptist megachurches in theory, its strange design made it seem like a building that had grown larger without any real plan, almost like a modern-day Tower of Babel. I keep mentioning its size, and maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but it really felt out of place in the middle of nowhere. The church's grandeur was too much for such a small, rural town. The top of its towering steeple was capped with a golden, two-pronged object that looked like a pitchfork. And here's another thing. I never saw a cross inside the building, at least not in the rooms I cleaned. There might be more hidden, but I wouldn't know. Since the church was empty most days, my job was lonely, with only occasional staff around. Surprisingly, the pay was great for such basic duties. There are 6 of us on the custodial team. Titus, the bitter old man, Shifty Dale, Ditzy Pearl, Ignorant Ray Nathan, Quiet Barry, and then there's Tom, or Tony, I'm not sure. He never wears his name tag for some reason. As I've mentioned before, I'm not a strong believer in the supernatural, but the isolation can mess with your head. Strange noises, odd shadows, figures flickering at the edge of your vision, and rooms that seem to change after you leave. These are things we often talk about on our lunch breaks. Titus, a man as mean as he was old, found himself constantly annoyed. As the senior member of the team, he never hesitated to bark orders. He despised talk of the supernatural and nearly punched Ray Nathan for suggesting, "Maybe the church is alive. I swear I hear breathing in the walls sometimes." Strangely enough, Ray Nathan wasn't entirely wrong. The church's classrooms, gymnasiums, and offices were eerily similar, making it easy to get turned around. And though the pastor and Titus dismissed such notions, it often felt like the rooms shifted ever so slightly. The Eternal Jubilee Church's pastor, Lysander Sinclair, was a peculiar figure, a washed-up rock star turned devoted man of God. Lysander was eccentric in every way, from his mannerisms to his appearance. Small and alarmingly thin, he wrapped his slight frame in a garish lavender and gold suit. Ill-fitting and outrageously tacky, it was his self-proclaimed lucky trademark, and he rarely appeared without it. Once upon a time, they said, he had been beautiful. But years of debauchery and drug-fueled rock star living had left him weathered and scarred. His sharp, hollow cheekbones and finely pointed nose gave him an almost statuesque look. His thin, scarred lips always seemed to rest in a faint, knowing smirk. His eyes were unsettling, bright green, feverish, and wild. They always seemed to carry the impression that the wild days of the 70s had left deep scars on his mind. The pastor's study was even stranger, a vast room filled with mirrors, with a small golden calf resting on his desk. Lysander never seemed comfortable when someone approached his study, as if there was something off about it. In reality, Lysander's band wasn't as famous as he claimed, though he always brought it up in conversation. The Crazy Court of the Cobra King was the only song by Holy Harem that had gained any real attention, though it was catchy enough. He spent most of his time at the church, often retreating to his study. But there were times when he could be found wandering the empty halls and classrooms, guided by his own reflection in the polished floors, humming a song long forgotten, one he probably wrote himself. When speaking to people, you could always tell he was more focused on the reflection in their eyes than on the conversation itself. Pastor Lysander always seemed to surround himself with attractive young men and women. As disturbing as it sounds, his attention was drawn to the physically beautiful. The more attractive and eager someone was, the higher they could rise in the church's hierarchy, based on my observations. He was fickle, changing his favorite person every week and hosting personal revivals in his office after hours. Among the staff, he seemed particularly interested in me, always finding a way to strike up a conversation whenever possible. Maybe that's why I always ended up with the later shifts. There was also a tall, muscular man with long curly hair who seemed to be Lysander's closest confidant. The jealousy and hatred in his eyes were undeniable. He terrified me. I couldn't stand being around Pastor Lysander. His almost whimsical, melodic way of speaking, his strange androgynous appearance, and that unblinking, panicked stare, all of it made me deeply uncomfortable. It felt like he could see straight through you, to your very core. As strange as he was, the people in this town were fiercely loyal to Pastor Lysander and the Eternal Jubilee Church. The way they spoke of him, you'd think he was their god. Strangely, many of the church members were unusually wealthy. Both the pastor and the offering plate were well fed by the generosity of the town's people. At first, I was highly skeptical. The stories shared in the break room were growing more bizarre by the day. Horned shadows, beautiful women with gold coins for eyes appearing in mirrors, rooms filled with young men dancing naked only to vanish without a trace, hoof marks on the carpet, and so on. Aside from Barry randomly finding a golden coin in his pocket, nothing particularly strange had happened for weeks. That is, until one evening near the end of one of my shifts, when I found Pearl, terrified and stuttering incoherent ramblings. I did my best to calm her down, but I could only make out bits and pieces of what she was trying to say. She mentioned something pale and horned that had rushed past her, charging toward the stairwell leading to the boiler room below. The boiler room was located at the lowest point of the basement, and the top of the doorframe was too high for most people to reach. When I looked up, I saw two massive handprints stained in something that glimmered like liquid gold just above the doorframe. I checked the basement, but it was completely empty, except for a golden lock of a woman's hair and a single coin, strangely bearing the image of a bull's head. "You saw the one with horns? I've been seeing its shadow for the past month," Dale said nonchalantly, unfazed by the strange story. Dale had been working at the church longer than anyone except Titus. He was a cold, grizzled man, and no one really knew where he came from or what he did before becoming a janitor. What was known about Dale Ortega was that he was agnostic and claimed to have seen a lot of shit in his day. An odd phrase considering he was only 24. A former drifter and self-described survivor, it was wise not to cross Dale. Pearl, the always cheerful woman who never failed to smile, didn't say another word before clocking out early, her face now hardened with fear. She never returned, and I later heard she died in a car accident. A damn shame. Ray Nathan, always the instigator, slammed the coins down on Lysander's desk. Lysander, a man full of nervous habits, began to absently fiddle with his collection of gold rings. "What curious little tokens, friend, but offerings go in the tithe box," Pastor Lysander purred, his voice always in a relaxed stupor. "What are they?" Ray Nathan asked, grimacing as he leaned closer to Lysander. Ray Nathan was a towering man, thick with muscle and even thicker in the head. Tall, powerful, and imposing, he was a mule of a man who easily dwarfed the most likely malnourished pastor. Lysander gently ran his long, thin fingers over the bull's head, etched into the coin. "You bring before me, man. This is mankind, our very nature, brought into being, the reflection of our soul." Lysander's vague, empty answer was cut short by Ray Nathan's frustrated snort. "Save the riddles, Pastor. I want to know what the hell these are and what's wrong with this place. I've put up with enough. You've heard the stories, down to the last detail." "You've never attended one of our services, Mr. Raymond. I'm sure a sermon would enlighten you." "I was born Baptist. I'll die Baptist." "Not whatever the hell you are." Ray Nathan's outburst, full of raw anger, was quickly silenced by the pastor's eyes. For the first time in years, Lysander Sinclair seemed focused and alert. His piercing green eyes, sharp like a viper's gaze, cut right through Ray Nathan's bravado. "I am a prophet of the true God. A brute and assailant like you would not understand." "Do not forget your place, friend," the pastor hissed. "I assure you, this is a house of God. The only thing wrong here is those who doubt the word. Now, tell me, whose head is on this coin and whose inscription is stamped on it?" "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, Raymond," he added coldly, slipping the coins into his pocket. "I must bid you good day, for I am a very busy man. Lest we forget, who else would hire you with your record? Feel free to take the rest of the day off. I expect a calmer disposition when you return. Is that understood?" For the first time, Raymond Nathan Morrigan felt small. The big man nodded in defeat. It was over. Ray Nathan walked into the pastor's office as a defiant, confused man, but he left it a broken soul. He was never the same after that confrontation, no longer as loud or brazen. He kept his head down and worked like the rest of us. I honestly thought he might quit. He began to haunt the halls of the Eternal Jubilee like a somber ghost, a shadow of his former self. Perhaps he had seen something deep in the pastor's eyes, a hidden danger beneath that glossy, distracted gaze. The place felt so wrong, and yet so strangely alluring. Even on my days off, I'd catch myself thinking about it, anything to fill the void in my mind at home. Up to that point, I hadn't experienced anything too out of the ordinary, just the occasional strange noise or missing supplies, but nothing alarming. That was about to change. One night, I was cleaning up the gymnasium after yet another chaotic youth activity that left the place in shambles. I was alone, of course. Everything seemed fine until a cloying musk began to fill the gym. At first, it was a sweet floral scent, but it soon thickened into a nauseating stench of perfume and scented oils. Out of nowhere, an unease struck me that I've never felt before, and never hoped to again. Something was terribly off, like I was sensing something alien to this world, something that didn't belong here. It's a hard feeling to put into words, but it was like discovering the world was about to explode. Panic and awe collided within me, a mix of amazement and terror all at once. In the distance, an unknown shape began to materialize, and my body was flooded with an oddly pleasant tingle. I tried to speak, but my words were swallowed by the taste of metal and an unfamiliar sweetness filling my mouth. In my peripheral vision, I saw a pale, naked figure standing atop the stage. It was too tall to be human, with both male and female features. Its golden eyes locked onto me, and its body was adorned with numerous piercings and gold chains that shimmered sickeningly. It had no visible genitalia. Whatever this thing was, I tried to convince myself I hadn't seen it. Maybe it would vanish like all the strange stories Dale and Ray Nathan had shared, but it stood there, staring with those coin-filled sockets. It was repulsive, yet strangely beautiful. I felt an overwhelming urge to look directly at it, but it took every ounce of my willpower to keep my gaze away from the golden androgynous being. "Bear witness," it suddenly commanded. For the most agonizing seconds of my life, I swore I could hear Wade's voice calling to me. I needed to look, but just like that, it was gone, leaving no trace. A wave of intense nausea hit me immediately, and I rushed to the nearest bathroom as my dinner surged up my throat. Unfortunately, I wasn't fast enough, and I ended up vomiting all over a freshly cleaned sink. Amidst the bile, the sweet purple froth of wine began to spill from my mouth. I hadn't touched wine in months, yet there I was, expelling an entire bottle. Just when I thought I was done, something violently erupted from my throat. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a coin. God help me. I had just thrown up a golden coin. It was completely clean of any bile, its surface etched with the image of two lovers locked in a passionate embrace. A voice in my head screamed at me to run, to leave this town and all these strange backwards people behind. I needed to go somewhere normal, somewhere alive, a place where he would still be alive. But then another voice slithered into my mind, smooth and seductive. It told me I needed to stay. He wanted to be here, didn't he? Like the suffocating sweetness of perfume, 1,000 thoughts of doubt clouded my judgment. Isolation is getting to you. Are you really going to crawl back home? Are you going to prove your parents right? You're going crazy. You can't leave. You couldn't afford it. They gave you this job. Not only did you kill their son, but now you'd be spitting on their kindness. You are a sinner. He would miss you. The church would miss you.